Hi, everybody. I'm Jessica Murray for Going Online. Today, we're going to be talking about the HyFlex course design model. And I'm really excited to be speaking with Dr. Jeanne Samuel and Dr. Amanda Rosenzweig, both from Delgado Community College in New Orleans. At Delgado, Jeanne is Dean of Distance Learning and Instructional Technology, and Amanda is the Biology Department Chair, as well as Director of Science Teacher Technology Training. Welcome to you both.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So, excuse me, Amanda, in an earlier segment, you and Jeanne gave an overview of HyFlex, a sort of course design model that really emphasizes choice and flexibility for the learner. Now I want to ask, what are some of the tools you've developed to implement HyFlex, and what are some important things to keep in mind?
That's a great question. So I want to start off, Dr. Samuel introduced me to HyFlex in 2015, and she introduced me to it as an instructional designer on a grant. So bringing HyFlex to us, it was new to the team, so there were 3 teachers, myself and Dr. Samuel as the instructional designer, and then we had one other administrator helping us. And when we started this, we first had to figure out what our definition was, and we explained that previously, and then we had to figure out how do we transfer this information that we need to do into optional types of equivalent assignments for students to choose whether to do it in class or online. And what we came up with was almost like a lesson plan template. And we started off with one that was relatively complicated, and through a few, trials and errors, we had some iterations of it. And the one that we ended up with is relatively a simple, 2-column table with some compare charts. And one side is what are we going to do in class versus what are the in lieu of class options. And this was guided by the teacher feedback, and then it was guided by student feedback from their experience. So what works best to develop the material that we are going to deliver to the students. I will say that this lesson plan or this template is, while it's very simple, it helps you fill in the gaps. And then recently, Dr. Samuel, 2 years ago, she introduced me to something called LEML, and I will let her explain this, but that helped us move into more of a visual or graphical representation of our template. So I'll let Dr. Samuel talk about LEML.
So LEML, or Learning Environmental Design Language, is something that the University of Oklahoma ILED team has put together. And what I like about it is a visual representation of, say, your course. It shows objects that represent the different parts of it, be it your lecture, your assessment, your practice, your feedback. And so at a glance, you can tell either the course or the lesson flow. And at a glance, you can see if something's missing. It's like, oh my goodness, I don't have anything for engagement. I don't have any feedback, or the feedback's only coming from the instructor, but it's a peer activity. Why isn't there peer feedback? So I really liked adopting that tool. And then I went back to our planning tool and I put some color codes into it. So it was easy to transition from this narrative-based or text-based planning tool to mapping out your course. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really helpful. And it's, again, sort of, it must have been surprising the first time you were working with these tools to realize maybe the gaps that were there. And I'm wondering if you saw any kind of pattern, or was there something in the gaps that, taught you something additional about either using HyFlex or course design itself?
Yeah. Amanda, may I start and then you take it?
Mm-hmm.
The thing that was glaring to me was, over time, people had these courses that were no longer matching their outcomes of the course. So we created what we call defatting the course, or taking the bloat out of it. And it isn't that the stuff isn't interesting or isn't good for remediation. It's just when you're focusing on a course and you're trying to design it well, especially for equivalency, focus on what it is you want at the end. So we found as a first step, we needed to do this exercise of going back, to ground zero. We also brought in backward design, UDL, and again, as I said, authentic assessment. And I'm going to throw it to you, Amanda, from there.
Yes, it's really hard as a teacher. You know, I was an instructional designer on the grant, but as a teacher implementing this, there's nice to know versus need to know. And often the nice to know is the fun clinical stuff that helps students have a better understanding of the need to know. But again, if we can't focus on the outcomes that we want our students to be able to achieve, then that nice to know will never make sense and flow into the lesson plans. So that was one thing that we had to work on, and the teachers that Jeanne and I were working with as instructional designers, they were very open to trimming that fat, getting rid of the unnecessary, and that also helped us look at their assessments. And many of our teachers in general have become to rely on our publisher tools, which are excellent tools to help you build a course. But we want to figure out how can we bring in alternate assessments that are going to be more meaningful than multiple choice, true, false, drag and drops. So one of the things we worked on with the instructors and in general that I'm working on with myself is using those publisher tools as like pre-class material and post-class as bookends, because they're going to give you immediate feedback. They're usually well vetted by the publishers, and so you can really narrow down to a granular level of which objective you are covering. So you can pick and choose what's necessary. But in the middle, when you're having your active class session or you're in lieu of class section, you can be really creative in how you're going to engage those students, and that's where the fun really begins. But there is a lot of upfront workload for the professor developing the class, but when they start to develop that for HyFlex, they're really developing for all modalities at once. And that is I would say one of the highlights of using HyFlex is when life happens, you're able to shift to online or face-to-face or a combination of both because you've prepared for both.
And I like to say that it's an efficient design because you're designing one time, focusing on those outcomes for all modalities. So while your mind is focusing on it, you're going to likely have better courses all across the board.
And then in general, you have to be relatively flexible and adaptable because student feedback is really going to guide and drive how the course evolves over time. We were fortunate that we were able to pilot it for 1 or 2 weeks in 2015 to understand what worked, didn't work, use student feedback, and that allowed us and the professors to take that information and use it to better design the full semester HyFlex courses.
Excellent. So just a couple of quick follow-up questions, or maybe first one, just a point. I'm thinking you're saying a lot of times your professors or instructors might say, oh, but trimming the fat gets rid of the fun stuff. So how am I going to engage the students or make it interesting? But it sounds like you're saying you might be cutting away things that serve your course less, that don't serve the outcomes, but then there's an opportunity to come back with fresh creativity to bring in some new assignments or materials that serve those outcomes better.
May I start, and then again you follow? One of the things that we did come across because of our LMS was mastery learning, and that ties back to Bloom's theory. And so we're not saying take it out, but if it's something that you think is exciting or something that's needed for remediation or for engagement and enhancement, then let their responses drive whatever it is. It could be opt-in. It could be determined by what score they earned on something. And Amanda's been fairly active with using mastery learning, so she might want to add.
Yeah. So one thing is I use mastery learning, which is really helpful because I'm using it where the student's score is driving their path. And it's not punitive. If they complete the pathway, they receive the points through participation. But because their score is going to determine how they move through the path, it will help remediate them through different assignments, objectives, and those assignments can be material that I do use from publishers, or I can self-create it. And what's exciting is there is a lot of freeware out there, so free software that is engaging software, so gaming, developing, And this allows students to synthesize and evaluate situations and not just recall and understand a definition.
Terrific, thank you. And then just one final question for that, this piece. Can you, and I know this was a little while ago, but can you think back to that 2015 when you first got that student feedback? What were some of the feedback points that you implemented, going forward? Or something, even something more recent too, if you're like, oh, but,
You want to start, Jeanne?
No, I was going to have you take it because you've had the recent experience that you can tie it back to the original experience.
Yeah, so the original experience, the feedback that we received was very well received. And when I think about some of the comments, the open comments, the qualitative comments that students left, it was touching in the sense that they felt the teacher was understanding their lifestyle. So being at a community college, we're going to serve a different demographic than a four-year college or university. Most of our students are going to have full-time jobs. A lot of them will have family and other obligations that are priorities to them, but they do want to succeed in school, and so they have to balance that. And some of the comments back were, I'm a veteran, and sometimes I have bad days, and I appreciate it that if I'm having a bad day, I don't get penalized for missing class because I have an opportunity to still make up the points in the content in lieu of class. Another comment was, I like the option, but I honestly feel that in lieu of class is more work and more time consuming. And what I've noticed is the comments that I've received from my class, which is active right now this semester in HyFlex, they parallel those. Most of the students are really appreciative of the opportunity to do an in lieu of class. And the feedback I've gotten overall is they want to attend class, but when life happens, as they say, and that is the exact quote they use, life happens, it's nice to know I'm not penalized. They did say it often feels like it's more work to do the in lieu of class, but then a lot of them like to do the in lieu of class in addition to attending class because it's remediation and exposure for them. So I'm seeing that the students from 5 years ago to today are giving us the same feedback and overall generalized appreciation of the opportunity.
And I would say that part is really, really big. Even if we don't have large numbers taking advantage of it, they really like to know that option is there. And that's the important part. Not the only important part, though.
Yes. Some feedback I got, and I always take my students' feedback seriously, is they would like more turnaround time for the in lieu of class option. And I agree with them, but I am teaching a fast-paced semester, an accelerated semester, so I don't have the luxury of extending in lieu of class assignments, but their feedback is something I will take and use in my full semester classes.
Wonderful. Thank you again. Thanks both to Amanda and Jeanne. Viewers, please come check out our additional videos and learn more about Amanda and Jeanne on our website. You can read their bios and check out some links. Thank you again to both for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you for having us.
It was fun.